All right, we got one more guest, one more segment here for this Tuesday edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is with professional handicapper Rolf Michaels from wagertalk.com. Rolf, how's it going today, man?
Going great. Nothing better than October with baseball, NHL, college football, NFL, and hey, basketball right around the corner.
Yeah, and you and I were talking about that before we started recording here, and this is where we're going to start talking a little bit of college basketball because opening night is 4 weeks away, and you were telling me, and I have to let you take the thunder for all of this. How many games are there on opening night of the college basketball season?
Well, with my quick guesstimate, there was 145 games on opening night, including Louisville, Miami. We have Kansas, Duke, Michigan State, Kentucky, Nebraska, Riverside. Again, just a plethora of games. And I mean, there's probably 10 more games that could have been TV games that aren't on TV. Utah against Nevada. So yeah, it's going to start off with a bang this year on November the 5th.
Yeah, most certainly is. And again, obviously, as I mentioned during the segment with Brian Blessing, our guests sound a little bit different today, and so do I. We're going to try and really make a concerted effort to do all these segments on Skype because the audio quality just so much better than what Blog Talk Radio provides. A little bit of extra work for me, but you know what? In the interest of improving the Bang the Book Radio listening experience, I've got no problem with that. And you do a really good job of improving the experience for everybody over at Wager Talk with the different guides that you put out, the different stat sheet things that you put out. And you put one out yesterday about the new head coaches in college basketball. And I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about this. And first of all, salute you for the work that you did. But second, to take a look here, there are 57 new college basketball head coaches. And that provides a lot of uncertainty going into a season where you already have significant turnovers. So as you're prepping for the year, how do you evaluate these teams with the new head coaches?
Well, you know, it's a process, and there's no simple way to go around and say, well, a new head coach is going to do poorly or a seasoned new head coach is going to do better. But, you know, I don't just list the head coaches, Adam. I try to go a step further and teach our listeners on where these coaches came from and what they did. Of the 57 new head coaches, 28 have no head coaching experience at the D1 level. You know, and while there's many assistants who got promoted, I think there's 11 of them. You have some weird situations where, you know, at Maryland Eastern Shore, Jason Crafton is the new head coach. You know, he was an assistant in the NBA G League for 1 year, an assistant at Delaware for 1 year, and then he was a D1 head coach. You know, Jerry Stackhouse is getting a lot of pub. Penny Hardaway, you know, went to Memphis. So now Vanderbilt tries to counter with Jerry Stackhouse. Well, Jerry Stackhouse was an assistant NBA coach for 1 year for Memphis. And he was a G League head coach for the Raptors 905. So how does that translate into the college game? We don't know. You know, and then you have your other experiences where there's coaches moving up the gap. You know, Alabama. You know, anytime you have those power programs, you're going to get an experienced coach moving up. Nate Oates from Buffalo moves up there. Obviously, Arkansas got a great hire with Eric Musselman, the previous head coach of Nevada. So you just try to break out situations and you look if the tendencies continue. If those coaches were great defensive coaches or press tempos, how much do they have to change their offense moving into the style that the kids played last year? Then you look in December. Did that new style take? Are they struggling with the changes? Did he completely change systems? So there's nothing that's going to say right now, bet these teams, don't bet these teams. But it just helps you as the season progresses to remember, hey, you know, this coach was here, and here, where, okay, the Troy Trojans now have Scott Cross. Okay, Scott Cross last year was an assistant for TCU for 1 year. So people forget Scott Cross was the UT Arlington head coach for 12 years. Well, we know those UT Arlington teams could play some defense. So I'm sure he's going to bring that style to Troy, where they're going to be lower scoring games and perhaps a value play on the totals looking at him early in the season.
Well, and when you look at college basketball, 353 teams, so it's impossible for anybody who doesn't do this for a living to know about all of the different teams and all the different conferences that are out there. We talk about conference specialization. We talk about trying to find certain angles or certain areas to really focus in on. And I think looking at new head coaches and seeing where they came from, what their philosophies might be, that's a really good way to go about it, because we know that the markets adjust as quickly as they possibly can. And when you've got college basketball going on early in the season, you also have college football and the NFL and the NHL and the NBA, excuse me, and a lot of other different things. It takes time for the odds makers to really adjust to tempo changes and some of these, different philosophies that these coaches are going to have. So look through this list. Rolf posted it on Twitter. It's over on Wager Talk as well. You can find a lot of value here by just getting ahead of the market on things they're going to be slow to adjust on.
There is, there's a couple conferences. The Big Sky and the SEC each have 4 new head coaches, so a lot of turnover. There's 4 conferences that have no new head coaches: the Big 12, the Ivy, the NEC, the Patriot. We have to remember that the 3-point line gets moved back this year. And there are still 353 teams. We lose Savannah State. They go back down to D2. And Merrimack moves up to D1. Merrimack is up in North Andover, Massachusetts. They played in the Northeast 10, a D2 program, and they made the tournament for several years in a row. So I think they're going to be a decent first-year team in the Northeast Conference.
Last thing I'll ask you about here is, obviously new head coaches are very, very important. And we've talked as well about, returning starters, returning production, all those different types of things in college basketball. As you said, we're 4 weeks away from the start of the season now. So what's sort of walk us through, what you do here in week 1, and then what you'll do in week 2 and week 3. And then of course the games start there in that 4th week. So what are you hoping to achieve in each interval?
Well, the nice thing about Wager Talk is they allow me to share all my products. They encourage me to do so. So I will have a full college basketball guide out in about the next 2 weeks, which walks through a team's 2-year history. I never want to look at 1 year, because if there's a team that returned 2 starters and was a 500 team and got outscored by 5 points per game and got out rebounded by 5 rebounds per game, was that an anomaly, or was that how a team normally reacts to 2 starters? So I go back multiple years, give you the records, give you the stats, give you the recruiting rankings, because we know, having no starters back in college basketball is much different than returning 8 college starters in football. If you have the number 1 or number 2 or number 3 recruiting class, well, you can recruit 5 new starters. We've seen it happen in the past with Duke, and Kentucky's been up there. So, the recruiting rankings are so much more important in college basketball. And I just, I give a shout out to 247. I just use their numbers. They do a great job. I don't pretend to follow kids in high school. So, but I put all that information together on one sheet in the college basketball guide, where you're going to have multi-year stats. You're going to be able to see the coaching changes. You're going to be able to see how a team has done and how they finish. So basically I do this. I look at what the power rating was 2 years ago, what my opening power rating was based on how many starters were back, see how many starters are back, and if they have any new transfers in. That's another thing. There's some teams that may be starting 2 or 3 new players that were transfers last year that had to sit out. So all that goes into just making an opening power rating. And obviously, when you're making an NFL power rating, it's stronger than a college football rating, because you're handicapping 32 teams versus 130. And the same holds true with, when you're handicapping college basketball versus college football. With 353 teams, if you're in a smaller conference and you come up with some stud player that nobody knows about, well, he's good enough to turn around a few wins and change your power rating probably 7 or 8 points. And that's the difference. You can't, the new quarterbacks in football that can change the way a game is played. You don't know of all the new players that perhaps can just become an elite 1-out type player to make a team, perhaps one of the best teams in one of the lower conferences.
Well, make sure to check in with Rolf here as his college basketball, progression keeps going here to get ready for the season. We'll do that each week. And then, of course, once we get to game week here, and again, that's 4 weeks from today, we'll start splitting the segment, or maybe just do all college basketball, depending on, what our listeners want. So once we get closer, we'll ask some questions about that. But we will do some college basketball talk with Rolf here on our Tuesday segments once that season gets underway. But for now, we're still looking at college football and the NFL primarily, and we'll talk some college football here now, Rolf. We're almost halfway through the regular season. With the 2 bye weeks here, now we're in week 7. Week 15 is conference championship games. Week 16 is Army and Navy. So now we're about halfway through. We should have a pretty good idea of what we're working with. What were some of the adjustments that you made, whether it's power ratings or something else, going from week 6 to week 7?
Well, the one thing that really jumps out at me, and I'm going to give the example of this coming up weekend, the public, and again, we have such a bigger public now with all the new sports betting venues and New Jersey being as big as it is, and some of the biggest bets. I mean, you see Mattress Mac at Houston reaching out to the New Jersey properties. He bet the big bet in Mississippi, but it was a FanDuel or one of those companies out of New Jersey that took their big bets. So those places are taking bigger bets than they are in Vegas because there's so many corporate sports books here. But I look at those teams that are on a run. ULL is the only team that's undefeated. Well, I don't think ULL should be a favorite Wednesday night against App State. I have App State as the better team. The stats clearly say App State's the better team. But since ULL is the only team that is perfect against the spread, we see an inflation in the numbers. Ohio State, I've talked to sportsbook directors. They're on a show I do. And, each of the last 2 weeks, Ohio State has been the biggest handle and has been the biggest detriment to the books on Saturday. Why? They're a team that's hot and people like to jump on the bandwagon. And so there's so many instances where I look at those teams that the lines are inflated and look to play against them because there's going to be a regression. And likewise, the teams nobody's interested that had gotten blown out, well, you're starting to see a different strength of schedule. There's some Sun Belt teams that played strength of schedule opponents. UAB, for example. UAB in I use the Sagarin ratings in college football for my strength of schedule, and UAB is number 200. That means there's 130 teams, 70 FCS teams at this point have still played a more difficult schedule than UAB. So my college stat matchup guide has strength of schedule, has the yards per game diff, the point per game diff, everything you can look at to compare those teams. So strength of schedule to me is the number 1, and then playing against public teams is number 2.
Interestingly enough, here, some line movement in that Appalachian State-Louisiana game here this morning with App State now a favorite at places like BetOnline, Pinnacle, and Five Dimes. So we have seen a lot of money hit Appalachian State the last 18 hours or so, driving that line down from where it actually touched +3 to all the way down now to Appalachian State as a 1-point favorite. I've got the game App State minus half a point. So, I agree with you that I did have them a slight favorite there. And that one sounds like maybe you've got them a little bit of a bigger favorite, but very interesting game there on Wednesday night to be sure. And you mentioned a lot of strength of schedule discrepancies at this point in the year. I thought there was one last week with Auburn and Florida, but Auburn just played terrible on the road in that game. Florida came away with the win, but yeah, strength of schedule really does matter, especially in the context that you mentioned in terms of point spread inflation, where teams are just going out there and blowing people away. It's almost like a lot of recreational bettors don't really care to find out who those teams were that they were actually blowing away.
It is, you look at the Michigan game. I mean, everyone remembered their loss to Wisconsin, and then they think everything is right after a win against Rutgers. Well, just like in the NFL, teams that played Miami and Washington, like Dallas that played them early, like Baltimore that played them early, we see those teams come back to the median because they had a couple easy wins early on. Everyone thought Baltimore was a Super Bowl team their first 2 weeks while they played Miami and Arizona, and look what's happened since. Same thing happens in college football. Yet you have to look at strength of schedule, and you compare the two. When you have a different strength of schedule, let's say Maryland to Purdue. Well, Purdue was minus 96 yards per game, but they played the 29 schedule. Maryland is plus 80 yards per game. They played the 73 schedule. Which team's better? Well, that's when you have to make the assessment and look at them. So even having the numbers in front of you doesn't mean you can make a play based on those numbers. It's how you analyze and use the numbers. But when you have two teams that have very similar yards per game and yards per play, and you have a difference in the strength of schedule. Obviously, the team that played the tougher strength of schedule is the better team.
Let's talk about a trio of Saturday games here. I think all three of these are interesting for a variety of different reasons and also difficult handicaps to a degree. We start with game 121-122 in the ACC. Louisville and Wake Forest. Wake Forest, 6.5-point favorite here. Louisville, a team that all of us have had to adjust up quite a bit because it seems like Scott Satterfield's really getting through to this team. They're playing a lot more discipline. They're playing a lot better. There was talent there. We all knew that they quit last year, but we were still kind of wondering how long that transition would take. Turns out it hasn't taken that long at all. And Wake Forest, a top 20 team in the AP poll. A lot of people like their offense. A lot of people like what Jamie Newman's done at quarterback. What do you think about this game here? Again, Wake Forest, a 6.5-point favorite.
Well, Wake Forest is now to the point where I am looking to play against them. I played on them earlier this year. The game against Utah State was great. Against North Carolina, they played well. I played against them, though, in their last game. They went to Boston College. They were an away favorite. Yeah, they ended up winning that game, but you saw them getting outgained by 93 yards per game. So we have a team that played a decent schedule early, but is a surprise undefeated team, which is now playing against inflated lines. I did a chart, Adam, and I just want to mention this. Wake Forest is a little different than the rest of the teams on this chart I'm going to mention because they popped into the AP 25 after their win against Boston College, and they've had a bye. But teams that started the season outside of the AP top 25 and then found their way into the AP 25 have gone 1-9 against the spread in their first game. As I said, Wake Forest fits the bill, but they had the bye week. So for a week now, they are saying we are ranked, we are undefeated, people don't believe in us. That's the exact type of situation I want to play against. And then you also have a Wake Forest team that has some decent stats because of what they did against Elon, shutting them down to 183 yards and 11 first downs. And what they did going to Rice, allowing 321 yards. The same Wake Forest defense allowed 596 yards to Utah State and 533 yards to Boston College. Louisville and Satterfield have the offense going. Again, they played a common opponent. They beat Boston College in a back-and-forth game, putting up 664 yards. The 383 they had in the opener against Notre Dame in the first game for Satterfield impressed me as well. So I think there's certainly some value with as bad as Louisville played last year and fading Wake Forest, which is a fat and sassy 5-0 and now ranked. And let's not forget, when you have Satterfield as a dog, this was my favorite Power 5 hire was getting Satterfield. I thought he could have gone to a bigger school than Louisville, but Satterfield is 17-5-1 as a dog his last 23 games. I do like Louisville.
And I think this is also one of those two where as people sort of look back through what happened last week, they're going to discredit Louisville's performance because Anthony Brown got hurt very early in that game for Boston College, non-contact knee injury. And he was, 6 of 7 for like 150 yards or something like that before he went out. So people are going to downgrade Louisville's win, saying, well, if Anthony Brown had played, Louisville probably loses the game. Maybe they do. We don't really know that. But they still ran up 664 yards of offense. So, again, there's a lot of things that you want to consider here at this time of the year and a lot of things to consider for that Louisville and Wake Forest game. A lot of things to consider here for this game as well. 125-126. The Red River Rivalry, Oklahoma and Texas, neutral site in Dallas at the Cotton Bowl. Wish I would have taken Oklahoma at 9.5, just because I knew this line was going to go up. I don't know if it would have been the position I liked, but now it's 10.5 out there market wide.
Well, this is one where if I were making a line on the game, without even paying attention to what my power ratings were, I probably would have made this game 11 because I'm the person that's been bashing Texas and and haven't been a Texas fan and talked about how they got outgained in conference play. And, they had 9 starters back this year, and I picked them 4th in the conference. But my power ratings still only have this game at about 8. So my power ratings are lower. You look at Oklahoma, and yeah, they've been explosive on offense, but they've had so many big plays. Their yard per play is 1.5 yards higher than anyone in football because of the explosive plays. Well, that's because you played a Houston team that was run over, South Dakota, UCLA, Texas Tech, Kansas. This is by far the toughest defense they faced. And the same holds, you could say the same holds true, but this Texas team at least was pressured in that LSU game. Full disclosure, I played against Texas at West Virginia, and, it's a game they got outgained by 36 yards at West Virginia. They were plus 3 turnovers. They got 3 easy touchdowns on horrible interceptions by the Mountaineers quarterback. But with that said, again, the last, 5 games, I think, in the series have been decided by 7 points or less. You have Tom Herman as an underdog. We're going to hear that record 1,000 times this week. I believe he's 13-3 at Texas and Houston as a dog. And I just think you have Oklahoma a little higher rated. Everyone talks about Jalen Hurts, and they've been able to do what they do because Jalen Hurts is rushing for 500 yards. Your top running back in Oklahoma only has 345 yards in Trey Sermon. Yeah, he's 7.7 yards per carry. And Ramondo Stevenson has 320 yards, 10.7 yards per carry. So I think if this is a game I'm not going to bet early, but if the game is close and Oklahoma has to play with some pressure, they have not felt pressure yet. Texas felt a close pressure game against Oklahoma State. Ellinger did great. West Virginia got close. Ellinger did great. LSU, Ellinger did great. With Jalen Hurst, again, how much smoke can you blow up this guy's behind? But every game they've played, they've outgained their foe. 3 of the 5 games, they've outgained their foe by over 300 yards. Houston by 278. Kansas by 185. If the game is close, I'm in a position that I think I would live bet Texas because the Sooners have not been tested yet. But I also think, when these two play, they score a lot. I lean with the over. My power ratings say lean with Texas, but I have not been a Texas fan. But you have the situation of Tom Herman, again, as a dog, which kept me off the LSU game. And, he proved that he continues to be able to game plan or be able to keep a game close against superior foes.
My line on this game is 11, so I'm pretty much in line with where the market is now because a lot of the 10.5s out there are minus 15, minus 13, a little bit of extra juice on those. So at least I'm happy to see it moving towards my number. I won't have any interest in this game. The over wouldn't surprise me at all because I think Oklahoma can still be explosive. I think Ellinger plays well, as you mentioned. We have no reason to believe that Ellinger won't play well because for the most part, he's progressing really nicely as a quarterback there. But early kickoff, total in the mid-70s. There's not a whole lot of betting interest in this game, but obviously will be a very, very good one to watch. You mentioned West Virginia. I got to ask you about this because I wound up not taking West Virginia last week. From a stat perspective, I should have regretted it, but also they lost the turnover margin. I'm going to be on West Virginia here this week, though, against Iowa State getting 10.5, just because I think that, West Virginia with that turnover problem last week, I think it's creating a little bit of inflated value in the market here this week.
Oh, I can't agree more. Austin Kendall was a quarterback I thought would do fine, but again, he now has a 9-7 ratio, and I watched the beginning of the game, but I didn't. On the third quarter, I was going somewhere, so I was just listening to the game on the radio, and all I could take is what the announcer said. But you look at the 2 top teams they've played. They went to Missouri, they were minus 3 turnovers. They played Texas, they were minus 3 turnovers. So, I can say I'm a little afraid, but their rush defense is allowing 4.2 yards per carry. They're allowing 58% completions. They're playing much better than a team that only has 9 returning starters at even 8 because they have an issue with one of their receivers. They sat out. He said he was a healthy scratch. They're having some issues with him. So, it's the first year teams like this, under Neil Brown that exceeded my expectations. And I do like looking for these teams that exceeded expectations with the first year head coach. If people are buying into the program, this is the exact type of situation you want to look at to find value moving forward. So, it's so much different than having a lame duck head coach or a guy that's been there multiple years where you can't rally the troops. Listen, I'm Neil Brown, and this is our first year. We're 3-2. We should have beat Texas. We now have Iowa State coming into town. We can't lose back-to-back games for these fans in Morgantown, and it is exactly the circle the wagons type game you could expect.
All right, so we move to a game in the Pac-12 here. 147-148, early kickoff in Tempe. Only going to be a 12:30 kickoff there, but I'm sure the fans still show out for a top 25 team, especially against an opponent like Washington State. Man, is this game a tough handicap, at least in my mind. Arizona State, 2.5-point favorite. If there was a 3 and there were some out there, those are now gone, where it looks like Washington State, the preferred side here. What do you think?
Well, I've been a Washington State fan, and I think that this line would be closer to pick 'em if they didn't lose to UCLA in that historic comeback. If they were sitting at 4-1 and their only loss was on the road to Utah, which a lot of people picked to win the Pac-12, there'd be a different perception of Washington State. But Mike Leach calling out his team, then firing the defensive coordinator. There's not many teams that have given up 105 points their last 2 games. So, yeah, I guess if someone's going to get fired, it's probably going to be the DC. But I still think this Cougars team, Arizona State prides itself on its run defense. It runs a little bit of a 3-3-5, much like Rocky Long in San Diego State. And you would think, well, with the 5 DBs, they're a pass defense team, but really that type of team shuts down the run very well. And they're only allowing 3.0 yards per carry. My problem is, or not my problem with liking Arizona State or fading Arizona State and liking Washington State is you look at the caliber of offenses Arizona State has faced, and it could be one of the lowest in the country. Kent State, Sacramento State, Michigan State, Colorado, and California. And, Cal was out their quarterback. So if Colorado at home is by far the best offense you faced, and you allowed 475 yards, 337 yards passing, this is the perfect matchup I like because of inflated Arizona State stats, because of the strength of schedule and the type of teams they played against a very unique offense in Washington State, who's off back-to-back embarrassing losses. There's not a person out there who's a college football fan who knows Mike Leach didn't throw him under the bus. There's not a person out there that knows this defense is completely embarrassed because their defensive coordinator got fired. It's one of 2 things for me. It's you back Washington State and you look for them to make a great run and finish the season. Or if I'm wrong with Washington State this week and they lose and they look ugly again doing it, then you throw them in the bus, and perhaps Mike Leach's coaching style could be getting a little bit old up there.
So I guess the question then, it sounds like you've got some fairly strong opinions on this game. Hopefully you grab one of the +3s that was out there at the 2 number. Do you just go ahead and take a stab with the money line, or do you take the +2 here?
Well, in my head, my power ratings have the number at 2. I did not grab the 3 because in my mind, I didn't walk it through. So actually being on the show with you and prepping for the game got me liking it much more. So, it's a situation early on Tuesdays. I go through the game quick on Sunday and Monday and make my lines. But, Tuesdays and Wednesdays are for digging in for me and looking for this type of exact matchup. And listen, there's a lot of people that say, hey, the number moved. Don't bet into a bad number. I've been in this business 40 years. I don't believe that at all. If the number out there still has value when you're handicapping the game, and it's a reasonable difference from your handicap, I would still bet the game. I'm not worried that the number moved one on a Sunday to a Monday and a few people bet it and the line moved and everyone else jumped in and copied that number. All I worry about is where I bet a number. And if there's a big enough difference from my number, I would do it. Will it make my card? Well, it's certainly going to be in the mix now. Now the next step is going into the papers, doing the reading, seeing what the injuries and the coaches' quotes and the press conferences. So, it's clearly because of the show and the conversation going to be now into the mix where I look at it deeper. And no, I'm not worried about the line move. I would still play it at the +2.
Well, and I'll tell you this, a very good friend of mine said to me over the weekend, you can't be afraid to lose. And I think that's important. I think it's a really important thing because keep in mind in the NFL, a lot of times you have to bet unsavory teams. You talked about it here already in college football. Yeah, betting the 5-0 team, sure, it sounds great, but you're also paying a premium. It's the team that's 0-5 against the spread or 1-4 against the spread that you want to look to back right now. You can't bet afraid to lose. And that's going to stick with me forever. And I never really thought about it that way. But it also kind of speaks to, some of these line moves and some of these line adjustments as well of, well, I didn't get +3. I can't bet +2. If you still like the game, you can damn well bet +2. You just, in the future, want to try to get +3.
Yeah, there's going to be line moves all the time. And you know what? Okay, we were watching the game last night with Marco and Brian Leonard and Brad Powers. And, Brad said, I'm sure he'll share this with you. He's been ahead of, I think, 5 line moves of 4 or more points the last couple weeks. And guess what? He's 0-5. A line move doesn't mean it's the right side. Somebody bet the game, the line moved. Does that mean they're right? No. They lose as many games as anyone else. So, I have a game that I put out as a big play and the line moved the other way. And people were emailing me, what's wrong? What's wrong with the game? The line moved the wrong way. Well, I said, this is beautiful. We're getting value. We were the ugly team that lost and got blown out last week against a team that had a fake win. This is exactly what you should hope for. But the public perception is the line move is right. And what's wrong with the game because I'm on the other side? Listen, bet the game with a better line. Or if the line's moved against you and you like the game, bet it as well. Bet what your numbers tell you and don't let the market dictate exactly what you said, Adam. Don't be afraid to bet a game because the line's moved in the wrong direction.
Speaking of a line move here, as we transition over to the NFL side of things, we go to game 255, 256, Seattle and Cleveland. The look-ahead line had Cleveland 2.5 in this game at home. Now the line is Seattle, a road favorite going to Cleveland of a point or a 1.5.
Boy, thanks for giving me the game, Adam, that, it just ended 12 hours ago, and I have no idea what the adjustments that are going to be made. But, being a Browns fan, all I could say is this. Everyone threw them under the bus against Tennessee. They lost 43-13. What do? They go to the Jets and look great, win 23-3. Everyone throws them in the bus against the Rams. What do? They go to Baltimore and win 40-25. Yeah, they played a San Fran team that was rested off a bye. They played a San Fran team without both starting cornerbacks again, with Landry, who hadn't practiced, who came out of concussion protocol. And, Baker looked bad again. So I am in a situation here where I'm usually not one to play Russell Wilson to play against Russell Wilson as a dog, but now he's not a dog. Now, the Browns know they're going to be a home dog. The public is going to make them aware that they are now getting disrespected. And my knee-jerk reaction is that I think I will be on the Cleveland side. I don't think it'll be a play unless their injury report comes out and everybody's healthy. But, the Seattle team got outgained against the Rams and won. They got outgained against Cincinnati and won. Pittsburgh, they were playing against a backup quarterback. At Arizona, they were playing against a rookie quarterback. So, the teams that had a quarterback who wasn't a rookie or a third string, they lost to or got outgained. So, tough road trip going to Cleveland in this spot. But my knee-jerk reaction is when the Browns look that bad, now's the time to jump on them and take you're probably going to have a 3-point swing by the time we get to the end of this week, as bad as they looked on Monday Night Football. And anytime you get a 3-point difference with no major injury happening, that's something you want to jump on.
I think so too. I mean, I think I may end up on Cleveland here this week. There's no reason to jump in and bet this game, but just simply the fact that it's probably a good buy low spot on the Browns because, look, San Francisco, extra time to prepare. Kyle Shanahan is brilliant. The dude is a genius. And we saw that with the game plan he came up with to really neutralize the pass rush of the Browns. A lot of counter and trap runs. You know, you had the double reverse. You had some toss sweeps. You had a bunch of stuff that made the Browns defensive line go sideline to sideline or cut back against the grain. It was brilliant. It was genius. It was exactly what San Francisco wanted to do. And San Francisco's got a pretty good pass rush as well, as we saw yesterday. Seattle can't surprise Cleveland that way. Seattle wants to run the football between the tackles as much as they can. I think that helps the Browns out quite a bit because if you spread the Browns out, you neutralize the pass rush and you add extra emphasis to those missing corners. I don't think Seattle can do either one of those things. Seattle doesn't have the same pass rush. I think it's a great buy low spot on Cleveland. And I also think schematically, it's a game that Cleveland matches up better for. So again, no reason to jump on this one right away. But right now, with my initial handicap on Tuesday, I do like Cleveland here.
You know, I'm going to add one more. You talk about the D-line in Seattle not getting pressure. And yeah, Baker was sacked 4 times and hit more than that. You look at Seattle's 4 games, their last 4 games, 1 sack against Pittsburgh. That was a backup quarterback. No sacks against New Orleans. No sacks against the Rams. And they had 4 sacks, but that was against an Arizona with a rookie playing. So, 1 sack in the 3 games when you're not facing a rookie the last 4 weeks just shows how their pass rush is not the same as what the Browns have faced.
One more game to talk about here, and this is one spot down by rotation order, 257, 258, Texans and Chiefs. And here's another game with some reaction. Houston hangs a 50-burger on Atlanta. Kansas City struggles for the second straight week, loses outright to the Colts at home. Line comes down from 6.5 to anywhere from 4.5 to 5 here. What do you think about this line move?
Well, Houston's question is their O-line. And, the 2 games that they lost, they got sacked 6 times. Their last 2 wins against the Chargers and Atlanta, they were sacked 2-0. So we know when Deshaun Watson has time, Carlos Hyde can run the ball. DeAndre Hopkins can catch the ball, as can Kenny Stills. I hate to say that, looking at Houston and looking at Kansas City, that I'm going to react and take Houston. But right now, if I had to play the game, the only way I could play is Houston, because we saw Mahomes, when he's not healthy, he's a very mediocre quarterback. If he can't scramble, we saw the scramble in the first quarter. With 3rd and 18, he runs around. It looks like he's going to get sacked and throws the ball for a touchdown. But in the second half, the Indy defense is not great. I mean, they are a very solid upper half defense. But Mahomes was very, very average. And if they can't run the ball and Mahomes can get some pressure from the outside, very few teams have an outside rusher like J.J. Watt, and he's not going to be tricked by Mahomes. It seems to be an overreaction from last week. But, yeah, it is also a situation where you look at Kansas City. They failed to cover 3 straight. They were in it tooth and nail against Baltimore. They were in it tooth and nail against Detroit. They lost to the Indy. They got outgained against Detroit. They got outgained against Indy. 4 sacks against Indy last week, and no sacks on the defensive side. To me, it's my eye test says Houston right now, it would be a play.
Yeah, and also for Kansas City, Chris Jones, one of their key defensive players going out, probably their best pass rusher, not able to go after Deshaun Watson here. And again, as you mentioned, that's been the Achilles heel for the Texans. So this one's not an overreaction to the point where I think Seattle and Cleveland is. This is exactly what you said. It's what you're seeing. It's the personnel, and it's also the fact that Mahomes' ankle just isn't right. And that makes him a different type of player. Yeah, he could stand upright in the pocket and throw, but he's mentioned the last couple of weeks, teams have shifted to playing more man on them. Teams have kind of given some more press coverage. He hasn't had the same windows to throw into. The Colts play a lot of zone, and they played man last week, and the Chiefs weren't really looking for that. So, again, teams are kind of figuring out Kansas City here, and right now it's been tough for the Chiefs to adjust. So this isn't an overreaction. This is where the two teams currently are, some of the injury situations, and also the schematics of this game. So, again, it's very important to try and figure out the nature of a line move in the NFL, if it is an overreaction or if it's just a team looking a little bit different than you expected them to look. Rolf Michaels, professional handicapper over at wagertalk.com. What's going on over there right now, man?
Guys, just go to wagertalk.com, go to the Ralph Michaels page. There's a Gridiron Guide. It's a college football newsletter. It's a full page for every team with ATS and over-under angles, the logs. You still have the first pitch, my MLB newsletter. You have my power ratings. You have the college football stat matchup. I did an NFL football stat matchup that just went up today. You got the college basketball head coaches, and everything is free. You do have to register the first time, but there's no credit card needed. You just got to put your name in and put your email, and then every time you go to my page, you can keep downloading that information free every week, and I'll be adding more college basketball stuff in the next week or two where you'll really have a nice sheet to be able to be not an expert, but I'll tell you what, you'll be ready to go on November the 5th when there's 140 some games to attack college hoops.
Well, and again, I mean, you're a tremendous resource. The work that you do over there is absolutely phenomenal. Again, the new head coaches, all the stat sheets and the guides, really good stuff there from Rolf Michaels of wagertalk.com at CalSportsLV on Twitter. Rolf, we appreciate the time as always, man. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you again next week.
Appreciate it, Adam.